This video is a continuation of my discussion on this article, The Uninhabitable Earth, appearing in New York Magazine, written by David Wallace-Wells, which seems to have ignited huge discussions on, is this alarming? Is this realistic? Is this apocalyptic? So in continuing, this is part B, if you like, of my discussion on this. So if we talk about, people do not understand how serious the risks are of abrupt climate change. When I say that, of course, there's levels of understanding across the whole spectrum, but the vast majority of humans on this planet just don't get it, okay? They talk of Miami and Bangladesh as still having a chance of surviving. But if you talk to scientists, climate scientists, these places just won't exist really by 2100, even as early as 2100. Now 2100 seems like a long way off there. It is, I would argue that sea level rise will rise, say, 1.5 meters by 2050, up to 7 meters by 2070. So these places won't even be around by then. You can figure out, what rise would be required to completely shut down one of these cities. 2 degrees of warming used to be considered a threshold of catastrophe, but already, we're just over 1 degree. 2016, I believe, was 1.44 degrees above pre-industrial, which is the year 1750. Even the way we talk about this is confusing to people because people are using different baselines. Do you talk about the change relative to the 1950 to 1981? Do you talk about the change relative to the turn of the century, say the 1880 to 1910 average? Do you talk about the 1850s? No, I mean, these numbers from Paris are based on pre-industrial, which is 1750. So the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they put out these reports and they're completely misrepresenting the threats that we face from abrupt climate change because everything is happening much faster than expected. We can talk about probabilities of temperature rises, distribution, stuff like that. I mean, the changes that are happening now across all different metrics, if you like, ways that we can look and assess climate change, things are accelerating in all cases. Things are moving much faster than expected. Things are moving much faster than computer models are saying because computer models can only include things that we know about. If we don't know enough about something, we just leave it out of the model. So these models they assume methane will mostly stay in place, for example. They assume that sea ice will be around until, it used to be a few years ago, they would say 2100, and then 2070, and then 2060, and 2050, and, it looks very likely, in fact, even probable, that sea ice will be gone for the first time. We'll have a blue ocean event by 2020 or earlier. So all of these policies and things that are based on the IPCC reports, you can throw those out the window, okay? People do not understand the extreme urgency of climate change. We all live our lives sort of in a certain way. We interact with certain numbers of people. We write reports. We're specialists in certain areas. And yet the world is collapsing. The earth is losing its ability to support life. And people are just not reacting as if this was the case. I've been saying for quite a while that we have to declare a global climate change emergency. The only way we can declare a global climate change emergency is if enough people on the planet understand that our very existence on this planet is threatened, not just threatened, but it's going to end. All the science is pointing to the acceleration of things, it's all pointing to basically the Earth losing its ability to sustain life. You know, we've had 5 major extinctions, and we're in the 6th extinction. You know, it's a slate wiping of the evolutionary record. It's like resetting the planetary clock. It's the best analog for the ecological future we're diving headlong into. Okay, it's not asteroids, it's climate change that has been responsible. The most notorious, the biggie, was 252 million years ago when life nearly died. There's a book with that title. Carbon warmed the planet 5 degrees. The warming triggered methane in the Arctic. We lost 97% of all life on Earth. Okay, well, we're changing the planet much faster than the planet changed during this extinction. We're adding carbon at a faster rate than it rose here. In fact, 10 times faster by most estimates. Even 20 or 40 times faster. The rate is accelerating. The International Energy Agency says we've stabilized emissions the last few years, and yet the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere rose by record amounts in 2016 and 2015. They're accelerating because there's lots of things in the dynamic system. There's sources of the greenhouse gases, there's sinks, and the sinks appear to be failing. So why do you think Musk wants to go to Mars soon? Why do you think Stephen Hawking is saying that we're basically finished unless we go to other planets? Why do you think many people that are in the 1% or 0.1% are buying bug-out places on remote islands? They're buying bug-out places. When civilization collapses, which they fully expect will happen, you know, could be soon, then they want to be able to go somewhere safe and have the money, and they think that they can survive for long doing this sort of thing. So we're in the Anthropocene. You know, this is, okay, there's, first of all, you know, okay, so I'll talk about some of the individual scientists and what they say about this, but the natural world is changing completely. The chemistry, like I said, of the atmosphere and oceans are changing. Wally Broker, a climate scientist who's actually in one of these related stories, says that humans are basically pointing a stick at the climate, and we've awakened an angry beast. You know, this stable climate that we've had, which has allowed humans to develop civilizations, is no longer stable. We're going into extreme instability. Now, remember from all of this stuff I say that I think that there are things that we need to do in order to restore stability to the climate. We need to zero fossil fuel emissions. We need to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, whether it be CO2 or methane, and we need to cool the Arctic to make sure that Greenland stays intact, the ice there stays intact, and we don't get complete disruption and huge emissions of methane and CO2 from the permafrost and the sediments in the seafloor in the Arctic, and that will dwarf all human emissions, and we're basically rocketed up to a much warmer planet, 5 or 6 degrees warmer average temperature than now within a decade or two. So, okay, so heat death. It's just getting too hot to survive in certain parts of the planet. You know, we're mammals, we're heat engines. We have to cool off. We have to be able to sweat. The temperature has to be low enough in the air to act as a refrigerant. We can sweat, and that sweat, when the water on our skin evaporates, it cools the skin, cools our body. It carries heat away from the body. If that's not possible, then we overheat. So Costa Rica, 90% humidity, 105 degrees Fahrenheit. This is lethal. Within a few hours, a human body would be cooked to death from both inside and out. Sounds pretty dire. First of all, you know, unless we communicate what is very likely to happen on the path that we're heading on, then we're not going to we're not going to survive on this planet. You know, if people, oh, be optimistic, everything's just fine, you know, there's things we can do. We have an emergency situation on our hands, and there's no reason to sugarcoat or try to hide any of the truth of this. So I completely disagree with the idea that tell people things are so bad and they'll freeze in the headlights like a deer in the headlights. Okay, come on, people are smarter than this. That might happen. They might behave that way for a short period of time, and then they say, well, hell, you know, life goes on right now, and we have to do something, and we have to do all we can to try to prevent this from happening. Sure, the planet's warmed and cooled, but the not at the rates that it's warming at right now. The climate window allowing human life is narrow. Okay? At 11 or 12 degrees of warming. Now, it should really, this Fahrenheit, it must be Fahrenheit, because if it was Celsius, 11 or 12, all of humanity would vanish. If this depends on the rate at which it warms, of course. So this is Fahrenheit. More than half the world's population, as distributed today, would die of direct heat. Okay, so it talks about the wet bulb temperature, and most regions, you know, will only reach 26 or 27 Celsius. The number is 35. Okay? We've had a huge increase in the number of places getting this extreme heat. Okay, look at this. In Europe since 1500, the 5 warmest summers have all been since 2002. Okay, even with the warming, this is an average warming. As you go up to higher latitudes, the warming is much, much more severe. You know, if you're already in a hot place, a small amount of warming will make this place close to uninhabitable. You know, and look at the effects. Like only, you know, 4 degrees, the European heat wave killed 2,000 people a day, up to about 70,000 people. This will be a normal summer soon. So there's a lot of, okay, so the heat is a huge issue. This is interesting. 1/5 of the population in El Salvador has chronic kidney disease, including over 1/4 of the men, 25%, from working in the fields. So dehydration, the results of dehydration. So heat stress, the metabolic rate of increases with temperature. Increase the temperature 10 degrees Celsius, you double the metabolic rate. You know, if you're a mammal and you can regulate your body temperature, then you're okay as long as you are able to regulate. But if you're, you know, if you're a fish or a bird, or if you're something living out there and the temperature's up 10, then your metabolic rate doubles, and we're getting huge mortalities of plants and animals around the planet because the temperature is just rising too fast. We obviously have to grow food. Okay, for every degree of warming, the staple cereal crops and grains, they decline by 10%. They're growing at optimal temperature now, which a lot of them are to maximize the yield. Then you raise the temperature a degree, and you get a decline of 10% of yield. Maybe it's even 15 or 17%. So if we're 5 degrees warmer at the end of the century, now this is back to Celsius, I believe, you know, we have a huge decline in food production, and with our rising population, you know, we have 50% less grain, 50% more people. Okay, this obviously doesn't work. Okay, there's obviously a problem here. So we need to start doing much better as a species, or we're going down. There's just no question. Okay, people say, well, we grow more food in Canada and Russia, but it takes a long time to form decent soils. You have to have many growth of plants, you know, leaves falling, the decay, increasing the quality of the soils. You know, we don't have good soils in the far north. So we don't have, so it's a problem. You know, drought is becoming a huge problem. Flooding is becoming a huge problem other places. Look at the droughts in BC right now, causing these enormous forest fires. Okay, so anyway.